Hey, I really want to give you guys a little bit more of my personality and a little bit less of a script. So I'm going to be starting that today, even though I will be talking about dead children. What can go wrong? Let's get right into it. Today I will be telling you the story of Diane Downs. Now, a lot of this happened before I was even born, but I learned a lot about it through the book Small Sacrifices by Anne Rule. It goes into a lot more detail than I'll ever be able to go to in this video, so I will link it down below. So, Diane Downs, how shall I even begin to describe Diane?
Such a nasty one.
So, Diane Downs was a 28-year-old. She worked as a postal carrier. She had 3 small children. And on May 19th of 1983 at 10:40 p.m., Diane Downs sped into the parking lot of an emergency room in Springfield, Oregon. Instead of getting out of the car like most people, she started honking her horn over and over and screaming, "Someone shot my kids!" And so the hospital staff rushed out and opened the car and made a gruesome discovery.
Her car is soaked in blood, and inside are her 3 small children, 8-year-old Christy, 7-year-old Cheryl, and 3-year-old Danny, all shot at close range. Cheryl is dead on arrival, Christy and Danny just barely alive.
Diane was also shot too. She was just shot in her left forearm, and she had already bandaged her arm before she got to the hospital, so her injury was relatively minor, especially considering what happened to her children. So the police were called, and Diane gave them the bizarre story of what happened that night.
She told us that she and the kids had been visiting a friend earlier that evening. After it grew dark, they decided to head home.
We were just out, I guess, sightseeing, I guess you'd say. And the kids got tired. They fell asleep in the car, so I decided to just head on home. But I saw a road I hadn't been on before. We like to take back roads, and just went down that road.
It was on this dark and desolate country road, listening to the song Hungry Like the Wolf on the car's tape player, when she says she saw a bushy-haired stranger on the road.
And there was a guy standing in the road, flagging me down, so I stopped.
She said she turned the ignition off, and she asked, "What's the problem?" He said, "I want your car." She replied, "You've got to be kidding." And it was at that time that he pushed her aside and then reached in and shot the 3 sleeping kids.
Everything was done in a matter of 5 or 10 seconds. He swung himself around and fired twice. One caught me in the arm, the other one I went off somewhere. Danny cried the whole way. I could hear him softly just moaning, and Christy was dying. God, all the blood, all the pain.
So Diane's behavior at the hospital was very odd, to say the least. She was super chill when she was describing what happened, and she even asked one of the nurses if she could go to work the next day, or she wondered if she'd be able to work the next day. And then, just 4 days after one of her kids is murdered and the other 2 are hanging on by a thread, Diane goes and gives this little reenactment of what happened for the police.
Just 4 days after her 7-year-old daughter was killed, Downs is filmed reenacting the attack.
Sitting in the car is Elizabeth Diane Downs, one of the victims of this attempt murder.
I'm throwing the keys, okay? I'm throwing the keys.
Simulating, yeah?
Yes, I go like that. I got in the car, jumped in, put the keys in. I just hit my cast. Started the car and left. The car door shut itself. God.
Downs seems lighthearted, giggling, even fixing her makeup.
When Diane was told that her son Danny would live, but his spine had been fractured, her response to that was, "So you mean the bullet missed his heart?" Also, she commented out loud saying she hoped that there were no bullet holes in her car because it was brand new. As you'll see though from my next video, weird behavior doesn't always make you guilty of a murder.
Knox's every behavior dissected.
The friends were telling us how Amanda had been behaving, performing cartwheels and kissing each other. I mean, who behaves like that?
At the beginning at least, police did give Diane the benefit of the doubt. After all, you have to understand, at this time, moms killing their children wasn't really in. And of course, they assumed maybe this woman was in some kind of shock. I mean, one of her kids was just murdered and the other two were hanging by a thread. So they released a sketch of the bushy-haired man that Diane described, shot her children. And initially the public was very sympathetic. It was when Diane went to visit her daughter Christy in the hospital.
I love you. Do you hear me, Karen? I love you.
And it was clear that this little girl was terrified of her mother. Diane also told the doctors that she knew Christy had brain damage and she wanted her taken off life support. The doctors were really taken aback by this because Christy did not have brain damage. There's no evidence of it. And so when police heard about all this, they decided to investigate Diane in a more serious way. So when the cops went to visit Diane's apartment, the apartment showed no signs that children had ever even lived there. There were no toys, there was barely any food in the refrigerator. The cops discovered Diane's journals and they found out she was obsessed with this married guy she was having an affair with. She did that a lot, by the way, had an affair with married men. But anyway, she was obsessed with him, but apparently this guy said that he never wanted kids or never wanted anything to do with her kids, something like that. And so that later became what the prosecution said was Diane's motive for killing her children. When the two surviving kids finally did get out of the hospital, Diane was not allowed unsupervised visits with them for obvious reasons. Christy's left arm was paralyzed and she was still unable to speak properly, and Danny was paralyzed from the waist down. They both received some trauma counseling. Still though, there really wasn't enough evidence to take Diane to trial. They were kind of waiting for Christy to be able to speak again and hopefully tell her story of what happened that night. Alright, I'm going to pause here because this story is about to get real crazy and telenovela-y to the point where it can almost be comical at how over the top it is. But you have to keep in mind that this woman had to look each of her kids in the eye and go, that takes a certain type of evil. So as the prosecution made their case against Diane, Diane tried her case in the media. She sat down, talked with anyone who would listen.
Roll over so she wouldn't choke on the blood, and it didn't dawn on me at the time that the blood was coming from her lungs. And as I say, she may be the only one to get me out of this. Would I have brought her to the hospital? Wouldn't she be the one that I would make sure is dead? There are too many holes in it. If I had shot my own children, would I not have done a good job of it? Why would I have taken my kids to the hospital? Wouldn't I have made sure they were dead and then cried crocodile tears? That's insane to think that I would do such a thing and then bring the witnesses in against myself. That's crazy. I'm here just to appeal for people out there, to, if they know anything, to call in. Anything to help out and find the guy that shot my kids. This man shot my daughter. My first reaction was to snap back to my childhood, to the pain that had happened to me back then, my marriage, my entrapment by society. This man was bigger than me. He was stronger than me. He had more power because he had a gun. And I stood there and I looked at Christy reaching, and the blood that just kept gushing out of her mouth. What do you do? The gun kept firing and firing and firing, and it was monotonous. It just kept going. It was like a slow motion picture. When he swung around, he was pointing, when he swung around, it hit the tips of my fingers. The gun hit the tips of my fingers, and that snapped me. And I went, wait a minute. I'm not trapped by society. I don't care if he is bigger. If I stand here and I say, yeah, here, take the keys. I mean, there's nothing I can do. You win because you have the gun. My kids are going to die. And I'm not going to let my kids die. And so instead of giving him the keys, I feigned throwing the keys. He did not take time to point the gun and shoot me, obviously, because he would have shot me the same way he did the kids. When he was swinging in the direction of the keys, firing the gun, he hit my arm. Everybody says, you sure were lucky. Well, I don't feel very lucky. I couldn't tie my damn shoes for about 2 months. It is very painful. It is still painful. The scar is going to be there forever. I'm going to remember that night for the rest of my life, whether I want to or not. I don't think I was very lucky. I think my kids were lucky. If I had been shot the way they were, we all would have died. What I see most is blood coming out of Christy's mouth, because that's what I see. I can't see Danny, and I can't see Cher. Sherry was laying on the floor. Danny is just crying real soft. So that sound stays in my mind. When I go to bed, I cry at night. Even now, I still cry. I dream about Cheryl. But at night, when I close my eyes, I can see Christy reaching her hand out to me while I'm driving, and the blood just keep coming out of her mouth. And that, maybe it'll fade too with time, but I don't think so. That haunts me the most.
So she obviously enjoyed telling that story, which is creepy as hell. But yeah. So just weeks before her arrest, Diane met her final victim. She met this young university professor in the park. She determined he was very intelligent and he had great bone structure. And so he would make the perfect candidate to have a baby with. So Diane was very aware of her cycle and when she was most fertile. So she showed up at this guy's house one night with some whiskey and some weed. And yeah, Diane went into her murder trial a pregnant woman.
You were pregnant at trial. Why did you get pregnant again?
I was extremely lonely. I missed my kids desperately. I had just seen Christy on the 2nd of October, and it's like opening a wound and pouring salt in. I was extremely lonely, beyond belief and beyond explanation. And on October 13th, I just went and got pregnant because I was so lonely. I love my children. I miss my children. And I know that sounds simplistic. It really does. And I have to admit that. And that's why I say there's so much more feeling inside than I can give in 2 minutes.
The police found a couple of witnesses saying that they saw Diane's car the night of the murder, and it was going very slow, like 5 miles an hour, and that they couldn't even pass it. So she obviously wasn't speeding to the hospital like she said she was. Still though, the prosecution's case was mostly circumstantial. It wasn't until Christy was able to talk that she took the stand to testify that her own mother had committed the murder. And there was apparently not a dry eye in the courtroom. Except probably Diane's, I'm sure.
Can you tell us your name?
Karen Ray Downs.
Now, if I said this card was black, would that be the truth or a lie?
A lie.
And you know that when you come into the courtroom, you have to tell the truth. You understand that?
Yeah.
You promise to do that?
Yeah.
Now, on the day when this happened, you went to school, and when you came home from your grandparents, did you go for a ride?
Yeah. Me. My mom. Shauna. Robbie.
And will you tell us where you went?
My mom's friend.
And what did you do there?
We petted the horse.
And when you left the horse, do you remember, was it light out or dark?
Dark.
And do you remember, was there any music playing in the car?
Yeah. Tape.
And do you remember, there was a time when the car stopped?
Yeah.
And when the car stopped, did you see any person standing in the road?
No.
And when the car stopped, what did your mom do?
I pulled the lever that went out to the trunk.
And when she got out, pulled the lever that went to the trunk, were you able to see anything else she did?
I didn't look at the back.
Was the music still playing?
Yeah.
Was it hungry like a wolf?
Yeah.
Now, did you see your mom come back into the car?
Yeah.
And what did you see then?
She kneeled down and...
You want to stop, Karen? Now, you said that she leaned across the seat.
She shot Shauna.
Was the music still playing?
Yeah.
And what happened then?
She leaned over to the back seat and she shot Robbie.
What happened after Robbie got shot?
She went over to the back of the seat on the...
Now, Karen, you just stay with me right here. Now, do you remember when you got shot?
Yeah.
Who shot you?
My mom.
Diane Downs was convicted of 1 count of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. She was sentenced to prison where she will likely remain for the rest of her life. Diane is currently 65 years old. Try having kids now. In 2010, Diane had a parole hearing. She's still in full denial of any responsibility, and it's also clear that whatever mental problems she was going through at the time of the shooting have gotten a lot worse. Like, she's full-on delusional.
Do you still maintain that you did not commit these murders? Or the murder and the other crimes you were convicted of?
Absolutely. I didn't commit them, and I still maintain my innocence. Rick is a guy that I'd been dating for about 6 weeks, and he claimed to be an FBI agent.
The kind of happy ending of the story is that the 2 surviving kids, Danny and Christy, went to live with the prosecutor and his wife, and in 1988, the Hughes officially adopted Danny and Christy. Those 2 kids went on to live private lives. They apparently both graduated from college. So the child Diane was pregnant with during her trial was obviously taken away and given up for adoption the second she was born. And a few years ago, that child, who is now a grown woman named Rebecca Babcock, came forward.
Days later, today, that baby is 26 years old, and her name is Rebecca. And after years of hiding from the truth, Becky, as she likes to be called, is now speaking out about what it's like to discover your birth mother is a cold-blooded killer.
My childhood was definitely ideal. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad worked quite a bit, but he always made time for us kids. We were a very close family.
Becky says she always knew she was adopted, but when she turned 8, she started asking questions about her biological mother.
My mom told me that she was in prison, that there was a book about her, and when I was old enough, she would tell me more.
But 3 years later, Becky still didn't have any answers, so she tricked a babysitter into revealing the name of her birth mother, Diane Downs.
From there, I went to the bookstore. I flipped through the pictures, and there was a picture of Diane sitting at a table with her hand up, and her fingers were eerily the same as mine, like identically. And it scared me. And I slammed the book shut and I left.
At 16, a boyfriend showed Becky the TV movie based on her mother's life, starring Farrah Fawcett. It was then, she says, the reality of who Diane Downs was truly sunk in.
She's not a mother, she's a monster. I kind of went in a downward spiral. I started drinking, doing drugs, sleeping around. I really was just trying to find love from anywhere I could. I ended up getting pregnant when I was 17 years old.
3 years later, Becky found herself broke, homeless, and pregnant for a second time.
I made the hardest decision I've ever had to make, and I decided to put him up for adoption.
Hoping she would understand, Becky turned to the woman who was forced to give her up as a baby.
I was in so much pain from losing my son that I wanted to relate to somebody. I wanted to know that the pain I felt was okay, and I reached out to Diane.
Becky is here. Welcome. So you wrote to your birth mom, the murderer, Diane Downs, in prison. And what did you say?
In my initial letter, I wrote her saying I was born June 27th, this certain time, just kind of describing my facial features and telling her who I thought I was.
And what did she then respond?
She responded quite normally, actually. She had been excited that I contacted her, and she said that she always knew I would.
This is so interesting for me and for our audience hearing your story, because you say your adoptive parents were loving, they loved you, you felt loved, you felt cared for by them.
Yeah.
So why do you think you started to spiral out of control when you had the love there? Somebody was there to love you.
Even though I had the most amazing parents, I was searching for something more. And
what were you searching for? Do you now know what that is?
Myself.
Did you receive that when you started responding with Diane?
No.
No.
No, not at all. And when I initially wrote her, I asked, I don't want to hear of your guilt or innocence, because I didn't. I wanted to find out about her family, her life, just her. I didn't want to hear the conspiracies and the details of what she thought happened that night.
Because she still maintains that she didn't do it.
Correct.
Okay. So I understand that her letters started to frighten you, because what was she saying?
They did. About the second letter, I became curious about my biological father, and I had asked her questions, and it angered her. She didn't understand why I wanted to find him. I think it was her way of keeping me in contact with her. She wouldn't tell me who he was. And her letters started to be conspiracy theories. She believed that she was being kept in prison to be kept safe, that her husband, who was some government official, was keeping her locked up because that's where she was safe. And she began signing her letters, love mom and dad, and that sort of thing. And they made me very uncomfortable. I asked her to stop writing at one point, and this was after she told me people had been watching me my whole life and were trying to kill me. And at that point, she then accused me of being one trying to kill her.
So then you concluded what?
That she's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then you just decided to leave her alone, or what?
I regretted writing her. You know, like you said, I have an amazing family, and there's no room in my life for someone like Diane Downs.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you found out that your biological mother was this notorious killer, it made you feel what about yourself?
I remember at one point my mom, my adopted mom, she had requested that I see counseling after I put my son up for adoption. And I was in with my counselor, and I was stressed out. Bills were due. I had just lost a child. I had the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I felt like I was going crazy, honestly. And I went into my counselor, and I said, am I like her? Am I going crazy? And she grabbed my hand, she looked me straight in the eye, and she said, honey, crazy people don't know they're crazy. She says, you're dealing with life.
But yeah, can you even imagine being adopted and finding out your mother was this person and wondering if you had that evil gene in you? I can't really imagine what that would be like. Alright, thanks so much for watching my story about Diane Downs. I am now taking any case requests for stories I'll be doing this summer. So if you have any cases you want to see me cover, go ahead and write that in the comment section, and I just might do it. Alright, I will